Welcome to the 100X Life Podcast, where we activate people who desire to live the words of Jesus and experience the abundant life he promises. I'm your host, Rob Dayton, and I hope this podcast inspires you to put in the work of following Jesus.
Now the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bind up the brokenhearted and set the captives free.
Welcome to day 15 of the challenge, the 62-day challenge. We're doing 100X Life. We got Brandon Schmiedeberg in the house, so we're going to be checking out what he's done. He's been through the challenge a couple times, so it's going to be really, really good to talk to him about. He's no longer a novice on 100X Life. You know, as we go through this, it's not lost on me that we're almost quarter of the way through the challenge. Quarter of the way. Look at you. You've done it. I mean, this is amazing. This is really cool. So let endurance have its perfect work, in the words of James. And this is definitely an endurance challenge. So let endurance have its perfect work. And I hope that you're starting to really enjoy the words of Jesus and journaling on them. Brandon, let's just find out who you are. You know, where do you live? How did you get into this 100X Life thing? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I live in Los Osos. It's a little suburb of San Luis Obispo County, San Luis Obispo City. It's coastal. It's beautiful. I'm very blessed to be here with my family. I have a wife and two young daughters, beautiful daughters that are highly energetic and teach me every day how to be a better father, how to have some patience.
I love that.
You know, I got involved with the master's program, and it was, you know, I was invited by a good friend of mine who went through the program and said, you've got to do this, and it's going to transform your life, transform your marriage, transform everything. And part of that was jumping into this 100X Life challenge. And I have to admit, I mean, that first 60 days, 65 days of the year, especially this last year, was completely transformational, you know, and it was all about how am I taking ownership of everything that I'm doing in my life and being ultra intentional about, you know, being diligent, taking control over my mind, my body, my spirit, you know, my heart, and really being extra intentional about doing certain things and not doing certain things, understanding that it might be a little painful in the moment, but, you know, I think the reflection, the journaling every morning has been for me really a way for me to recap the previous day. And I like journaling in the morning because it helps me get in the mindset for the day. And then at the evening, you know, if I'm laying down in bed, you know, I can kind of reflect on how did that day go? And it's been really, really beneficial for me to do it that way.
That's really cool. So what you're referring to is the thankfulness exercise at the end. And it sounds like what you're also using that as a reflection point on how the day began in your journaling.
Correct. And, you know, for me, it's sometimes I'm just recapping, hey, God, this is what happened yesterday. And other times I'm saying, these are the things I have on my mind that I don't know why I have them on my mind, or I can't get them off of my mind. And, you know, they could have nothing to do with anything I'm doing that day. You know, I was reflecting on some of the stuff from this past year, and I had a lot of words about my relationship with my dad. And, you know, happy to say he's actually here this weekend. As we are celebrating some holidays, and we've had some really good conversations in the second half of the year, prompted a lot of, I think, by a lot of my reflections in the first half of the year.
Yeah, that's so cool because, you know, part of intentional living, I think we could argue, is also about just being realistic about our thoughts, realistic about our actions, realistic about what's right and what's wrong. So the intentionality of the 62-day challenge is really working that muscle of intentionality. And then what you're saying is, in your thoughts and working that out, probably a lot of things that are parallel within the challenge brought you to a deeper relationship with your dad because you started to consider, okay, so where am I really at with my dad? What are the things that have been said or unsaid? Or how could I progress and really intentionally love my dad? That's amazing. And so that is kind of like, tell us a little bit more about that, because that is true. We call it fruit. We try not to call it fruit. That's a reproduction of Jesus' words in a relationship. Tell us a little bit more about that. That sounds very powerful.
Yeah. And I think, it started initially with me saying, again, I have two little girls and I don't do everything right all the time. And sometimes I'm a little harsh, or at least I'm harsh in the eyes of my wife. And for her to say, hey, you got to take it easy on them. Or, if you get all crazy and kind of blow up at them, for something, then, what is that teaching them about how to handle their own situations in life? Like, okay, thank you. I get it. But it also allowed me to reflect on, where did I learn some of that? And some of that was probably learned as I was a kid and with my dad blowing up and different things like that. And so I got really introspective about how can I be a better father? How can I change my family tree to be more Christ-centered and more respectful and all of these, positive affirmation words. And part of that journey for me was saying, hey, I got to go reconcile some things with my dad. And I've not just him, there's other people too. And I have to think about how can I have the second half of my relationship with him, my life with him while he's still here, and have that be impactful for my daughters just as much as his dad, my grandpa, was impacting my life. And so I think it's been really interesting for me to say, go on that journey and basically say, okay, these are the things I'm trying to do as an individual. I'm showing these to you as hopefully a representation of how I would like to have you interact with them, but also I just want to have a better relationship with you. I want to be more communicable to you. I want to go do more fun adventures with you. I was actually reflecting on some of the journaling I did this last year, flipping through some things going, man, I was talking about going on adventures with my dad, and I did a fun adventure with my dad in the second half of the year. And I was like, man, that's really cool. I'm glad that I could jump into that, and what maybe it wouldn't have ever happened, maybe it would have, but I'd like to think that being intentional and thinking about it through this process is what was the catalyst for me to actually put something in action.
That is so good. And I know from experience with my own dad who's passed away, and I know from experience with many guys that I've coached whose dads have passed away, there's usually a certain level of regret in terms of what they did not do with their dads. And I 100% agree with you, Brandon, that your intentionality, journaling, thinking, creating mind space around wanting to intentionally be in a relationship with your dad absolutely resulted in you getting together and doing something special. I mean, that's kind of what this is all about. It kind of where I want to go with the question, I want to go back to the master's program, somewhere you kind of really started, because that intentionality of living, particularly for our family, you talk about your daughters, your wife, your dad, your mom, like intentionally living with them and investing in those relationships is something that comes out of that. And then for those who don't know, the master's program is a 3-year journey. It's a quarterly journey, and it is all about intentionally living first life mastery, the areas that God's given only you to do. And then second, your life mission, which is the unique design that Papa put into you that he wants to see. Jesus is looking for a return on investment. We want to see that in this life. Tell us a little bit about your master's program journey, and then how does 100X Life fit in? How would you just think the 100X Life fits into that master's program journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So to start, I've in the middle of session 6. So I'm about halfway through the program. And I'm actually going through the Kingdom assignment right now. I've been going through this book and really trying to figure out in that transition of, some of my life mastery to my mission, what am I on this earth to do? What is my kingdom calling? It's been really eye-opening, and I think every quarter there's a different focus. I've had some quarters that I have, dove in deep and really tried to pull every little bit of information out of this program as I can.
Nice.
I've had some other quarters that I've kind of said, okay, I know those are some good ideas and I'll get to them when I get to them. And I mean, I found even just, some session, I was like, hey, I really got to circle back to this because I know that everything's compounding, right? And so, I think this TMP, the 100X Life Challenge, really focuses to me on, kind of sessions 1 and 2 of the master's program. There's a lot of,
Yes.
initial, like some physical transformation, basically what are you focusing on? What realm? There's 4 realms that you can focus on, and how can you, be intentional about doing those things. And so, it's a little bit of an overview, and it kind of brings it all together at the same time. I found that for me, saying, oh, well, I'm a little overweight, a little sluggish. I, drink a decent amount. I eat sugar. I love sugar. I love chocolate. I can like cut some of these things out and like get better. But, and I kind of approached it that way initially, just like, yeah, this is a good challenge. It's a new year, new me, whatever, throw out your hashtag, call it good. But I mean, the more that I got into it, I was realizing, it is cutting certain things out, but it is also adding a lot into it where it's a lot more introspective, and it's a lot more, I had somebody reach out to me or tell me, kind of at the end of, maybe the last 10 days of the challenge this last year, I had been sending updates to a bunch of guys that, are all across the California, and, we play fantasy football together. Our relationship is, very much like we're going to razz each other, and, because that's just the nature of it. And all great guys, but I started posting, videos of things as I'm, hiked up to the top of a mountain, and I'm just thinking about stuff. I've been praying for 45 minutes, and I get up there and I'm just, half out of breath, and taking a video, showing them the panorama and just talking about things I've been praying about. And I got a lot of response from guys that I don't think had a good faith before. They were like, dude, I love what you're doing. Like, you're killing it. And I was getting affirmation I wasn't even seeking, but I felt like me just kind of sharing, hey, this is what the journey I'm on right now. It was giving them an opportunity to say, like, hey man, like, yeah, like, tell me what you're doing. I want to do some of this. And I know that some of them have, as I'm recording this, we're in the fantasy football season too. And, so we're all there, and it's now been a year of us having conversations outside of football, which is really, really cool.
That is so awesome. I love, there's so much in there that you're giving us, and I'm so appreciative. It's interesting that your guys in fantasy football, which is awesome. I mean, we have all these relational things the categories that put us together as people, focused on football. I know for my wife, that's exactly what she does is, in fantasy football, and knowing where every team is at and what's going on. But then also for them to feel an injection of, hey, I'm your friend and I have something valuable to give you in a video. How many people do that? I feel like the phone is designed for us to, when we think of somebody, that we actually, do a video, do a memo, do a text to say, hey, I'm thinking about you. And you could take that even further. And, you were praying an hour before. It doesn't mean you need an hour, but you're praying and you always, we have these rights as sons, call them sons. I don't say sons and daughters because the Bible just refers everyone's a son, and also that we're a bride somehow. So yes, ladies are included in that, in the sonship, which has a lot of rights in the Jewish culture. And because of that, we're going to hear his voice. We're going to hear what he's pushing us to do. If we're following him, he's going to give us prompts on where we're going. And I love that. You pick up the phone, you put on a video to your bros, fantasy football bros, and then say, look, this is important. This is what I'm hearing. This is what's going on. And this is who you are. That kind of injection of intentional living and loving is really something going back to something you said before, the Christ-like, we want to be Christ-like, but that seems so heady and elusive. But what Jesus is saying, hey, is just put my words into practice, and that's who you will be. That's how you will follow. And this for you is leading into so much intentionality of where you're going. Is that right? Was there more to that? This 100X Life Challenge that's actually bringing stuff out for you and kind of giving to other people?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think, just I want to throw in there really quickly, some of these fantasy football guys, they're doing the challenge this year. I've got commitments to
Wow.
one that they're like, yeah, no, I'm going to do it. Cause I said, I'm doing it again. I want you to be there. And, some guys are like, okay, I don't know. And I said, I think you should all try. Like what's the harm in trying? If you don't want to do every aspect of it, don't, but maybe you are intentional about a couple of things, either a couple of things you're specifically struggling with, or, just getting into a new rhythm. The atomic habits, right? You're not going to change a habit in a day or a week. Doing this thing for a couple of months is going to change some things, and I think it's for the better. But as far as what did the 100X Life give me? I mean, even just some general knowledge, I said, I used to drink a lot. I barely drink anymore, and I'll have some, it's not like,
Isn't that amazing?
Can't drink. No, I actually had a glass of wine last night with my parents at dinner. Like it was nice. It's not that I can't do it. I'm just more intentional about, well, I don't need to just go out and drink, if I'm going to have a special occasion or I want to celebrate something, like, yeah, that could be part of it. But it's allowed me to be intentional and keep that intentionality throughout the year. And to be honest, like I'm ready to do it again. Part of me is sitting there going, okay, yeah, I went on a walk this morning. It was 42 minutes. It felt good. I do still walk pretty much every morning. But it's like, I got to get some other workouts in, because, going back to 2 a day it's going to be a challenge, but that's part of it. It's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be challenging.
That's so cool, and it does. And then you were saying earlier that some things I'm doing now, and some things I'm not doing. You're referring to the challenge. I'm saying no to some things. I'm saying yes to others. How is that juxtaposition or that relationship of saying no to, say, alcohol or added sugar, and saying yes to other things? How is that related for you in terms of the transformation process of 100X Live?
I assumed going into it that the first time I went out with work people or to go do anything and I didn't order a drink, I bet everybody would look at me like I'm crazy. And nobody even asked. They're like, hey, can I get you anything? No, I'm good. Like, okay. Like, move on with their life. I'm like, oh, this is all about me. What's in my head, And so if they don't actually care about any of that stuff, then I'm not going to care about what they think about it. I'm just going to focus on, hey, what am I doing for me, or based on the commitment I've made with God or with my wife, or, whatever, about, hey, we're going to be intentional about these things. I know I keep using that word, intentionality, but
It's
that's
powerful.
what it is. And I think that for me, this challenge, the thing I love about this challenge, full disclosure, is like, you set it up so that you can't lose, right? Like, Here's a list of things that you could do. And if you do all of them, you're going to see some amazing transformation. But if you do half of them, you're still going to see transformation. I was thinking about something just yesterday, and I forget which session it's from, but it's part of the TMP program that, you learn between the difference between the gap and the gain. And I was thinking about, man, to step back real quick, what that is for those that don't know is, say you're starting at 0 and where you want to get to is 100. You may think about something a few months down the road and be like, man, I'm only at 70. I still got 30 to go. I'm like, this is so challenging. And you don't think about, okay, you started at 0. You went from 0 to 70. You can celebrate that just as much as you can use that as a motivation to get you that last 30. Or maybe you don't get to that 100, or maybe that 100 keeps moving. Because I know it does for me. I've moved my end zone so many times, but it's because I keep progressing. I don't want to just get to a certain point and stop. I want to get to that certain point and say, all right, what's the next one? What's the next goal? And so I was thinking a lot about, what is my gain? And I'm gaining a lot in the challenge. And even if I have a little bit of gap of like, okay, I was hoping that by the end of it, I was going to lose a certain amount of weight, or I was going to, I was going to want to wake up and journal every morning for an hour. And I don't want to do that anymore. I wanted to take a break and not journal for a couple of days. And so I didn't, but then it wasn't like I stopped. I just said, okay, now I'm going to journal when it makes sense. And sometimes it's, more of a note, and sometimes it's, a couple pages, and but it's all based on, what am I feeling in that moment? What am I needing to reflect on in that moment? What has God put on my heart in that moment?
So cool. And maybe what you're hearing at the time, which is kind of my jam is like when I'm present with God, there's lots that I have to say, but then also sometimes I'm asking him, or a lot of times actually I'm asking him, like, what do you think about this? And then that's kind of where the journaling goes, which has led to the journal prompts that are in the book, and as a part of the challenge. Tell us about that for you, because a lot of people struggle with what I'm asking, which is ask one member of the Trinity a question and then hear from them the answer and write that down. Tell us about, how did that go for you? Tell us the highs, the lows. What happened?
The first time, I forget one of the prompts, it's already happened, but one of those first prompts, you said that it's like, first of all, I don't think that's a possibility. Like, that's not a thing, right? I've never done that. Like, I just talk to God. I don't hear from God in a way that he's like going to use my hand and write out all these words, right? Like, that doesn't happen. And yet, about halfway through the challenge, I was laying on my couch. I've got a little couch here in the back of my office, and just laying on my couch, reflecting, journaling. And it was weird. I like fell asleep like all of a sudden. And this was, again, I just slept, I slept, I took a walk, I came back, I'm like ready to start my day. I'm going. And I wrote down, maybe a paragraph of stuff, and kind of like fell asleep and woke up and was like, I just started writing, and I wrote like a page and a half of things that God had put in my mind, and was just like, no, you got to write all of these things out. And I was rereading them this morning. So there's some powerful stuff in there, about, hey, this is how I need you to make some changes. This is how I need you to treat your wife. I need you to know that I'm changing her heart, and I'm also changing your heart. She's praying for a bunch of things too. You might not talk about it on a daily basis, but I talk with her just as much as I talk with you. In fact, I talk with her more than I talk with you. And so, like,
this is God
it's okay
telling
if
you
this.
this.
You want to come to me a little bit. And so, yeah, I mean, I will say, not every time that you had a prompt in there that said, journal about what the Trinity is speaking to you. It's not like every single time. I had this one time, and then every time after that, oh yeah, no, here's what the Trinity's saying. Like sometimes I'm too distracted, or I'm trying to get through something because I got a meeting coming up. There's plenty of things that can get thrown in the way that would be discouraging to investing that time. But I will say I have learned how to kind of slow things down, calm my brain, try and turn off as many distractions as possible, and basically just listen. God is always responding.
Wow.
What I've heard, what I've learned is that God always responds. It's not always the response you're hoping for, and it's not often in the timing that you are looking for. But if you are constantly in conversation with God, then he will start to reveal certain things to you that say, oh yeah, remember that thing you were praying about like 2 weeks ago? Here's your answer to that. And if you're not thinking about it, you might be like, God, what are you saying? But if you are constantly in conversation, he'll give you the reminder of like, this is the answer to the thing that you were asking about a few weeks ago. Not just like, God, I'm talking about this. And he's like, yeah, but I'm giving you an answer to that. And you're like, what? No, I want the answer to this. He's like, in due time, son, it'll come. But right now I'm going to put this other thing on your head. So.
Wow. And he's all about the timing. Yeah. It's interesting as you're talking, I'm thinking, man, we don't really have God doesn't have a speaking problem. We have a listening problem, because we don't position to listen. And that's kind of what this challenge does. It really positions you to listen. And what I'm hearing from you, Brandon, is that, yeah, you didn't like every day wasn't perfect. Every day didn't have feels like you're flowing with the words of God, but so many did. And I love the fact that you're having this kind of wrestling match with the worries or the cares of this world. At the same time, I'm trying to intentionally journal and listen to God. That sounds like that's the gym, the spiritual gym that's getting you maybe we could call it the muscle of faith to actually have the conversation and know you're hearing.
Definitely. And again, I was pretty consistent about get up in the morning and journal. There were some days that just didn't work with my schedule, or, I got something else kind of thrown at me. I have to do it a different time, and there were a couple of days I'm like, hey, I'm going to journal every day. That was one thing I told myself. I'm not going to skip a day of journaling. So there's a couple of journal entries. It's like, dear God, today's a busy day. Love you. Like, I might connect later today. If not tomorrow, I promise to be better. And, that's my journal, or, hey, this is words of Jesus, number 9, do not judge. I'm having trouble with this. I'm going to circle back to this, but that was, it gave me an opportunity sometimes to just say like, hey, I got to reflect on this before I even write it down. Sometimes I'm not ready to figure out what am I even trying to talk about, 5 minutes after I go through the prompt. I need some time to have my own personal reflection, and then I'll circle back later and I'll journal, and, it's probably a little bit more cohesive and, reflective and intentional.
I love that because, Father God doesn't beat ourselves up. We tend to do that to ourselves. Typically when the enemy is like trying to say something. So I love that you gave yourself permission, and that's really cool because that leads us to do not judge. So word of Jesus, number 9, not that it's officially number 9, it's just what it is in the book. But like this word was important to you. And I'll just say on the onset, this one is kind of in the trilogy of forgive, do not judge, do not condemn. They definitely go together. And as we found out from forgive, which was yesterday, Jesus is very serious about this forgiveness thing, and I think it's the one thing that if we're going to do anything in the kingdom, if we're going to be Christ-like in any way, we have to adopt his forgiveness, because when we do, life goes so well. And when we don't, we're basically just being tortured by the enemy. Yeah. So let's read the scripture. So this is from Matthew 7:2 in the NIV. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. And then we have a scripture citing for Luke and John also saying this. Interesting that Jesus is saying that, and he also says is forgive or else you will not be forgiven. He also says that. So this one is kind of in that lane. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. It almost feels like, Brandon, that he's appealing to our self-interest. Like, I certainly don't want to be unforgiven or judged. Like, maybe I should look into this. How did it go for you?
Yeah, I think I'm looking back at my assessment from this last year, and I marked myself as refocusing. You know, it was something I needed to look at and say, I'm actually doing a pretty good job, but I could tighten things up a little bit. And I think
that.
a lot of it stemmed from work. You know, I've done a lot of transformation in the last year to, you know, determine that, hey, it's not 24/7 work. You know, working is important. It literally pays the bills. You know, it's necessary. But I don't have to be so judgmental of some of these other people that are either in my industry or, you know, some coworkers or whomever. You know, I don't have to worry about judging them, because when it comes down to it, I'm going to be judged twice, right? Like, I'm going to be judged to get into heaven, and then I'm going to be judged about how well did I do on this earth to determine how easy it is for me to, you know, go through those gates. And so in that sense, I want to be as I'm not sure what the word is. Judgment free is the non educational word for it. But, you know, basically, like, I want to go through this world giving people their due, assuming the best in them, and in turn hoping that they're seeing that I'm trying my hardest to be a good person, however you want to define that. And in doing so, I'm going to go through this and say, they might be having a rough day, and that might be why they are responding in this manner. And I don't actually know them well enough to know what could be going on in their lives. And maybe it's just as simple as, like, it's a chain reaction of somebody else is having a hard day. They cut off the person that I'm talking to now. That made them get a little nervous or something. And then they were a little late they got frazzled. And so they ended up being a little late to their work. And then things just kind of steamroll. And now I'm talking to them in the afternoon, and they're just like, they're done for the day. And so they're a little short. And, you know, and like, hey, what did I do to deserve this? I'm just asking a basic question to try and help you out on the project or something. And they're like, I don't want to deal with it. I'm like, okay, but I don't know that. I can't, it's not fair for me to say, dude, this guy's a jerk, you know? It's like, no, man, he had a rough day, and I have no idea why he had a rough day. And I have tried my best, especially over this last year, to determine, like, how can I then say, man, what must have happened in his, not necessarily his life, but what must have happened in his day to be so difficult that he couldn't, you know, just be loving this afternoon. And so for me, I try and say, hey, here's some grace, and I'm going to want that grace too, because I'm going to have my own rough days. And again, circling back to, you know, hey, my wife coming back to me like, hey, you can't talk to the girls that way. Like, they were just playing, and I'm sorry it was loud or whatever. But, like, calm down. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, you were right. I got to calm down, because, you know, I'm judging them, my 3-year-old and 5-year-old, you know, about things that they're just having fun, or they're learning, because of their age. And so if they're learning, I can also be learning too.
I love that perspective that we can look at people circumstantially, or we can look at them through a character lens. And usually when we make a character judgment, that's when we're actually doing the judging. But our character judgment is based upon circumstances that we're seeing in their lives. And I love how you said, hey, let me talk about the circumstance, which so many times in our life, we have no idea what the circumstance is that would promote the behavior. But when we treat their character more as image bearers of God, that they're precious to him, that they're precious to us, and that that there's so much more than the cares of this world and the distractions of other things. And we just dismiss, not in a way like it doesn't matter, because sometimes circumstantial stuff does matter and people can kind of lose it. But we're not going to make our character assessment based on the circumstantial evidence we're seeing of someone raising their voice, or someone being late, or someone, not texting us back. How many times have you texted and they're like, you hear radio silence, so then the battle of the mind begins, well, they probably just didn't see it. I'm not going to judge them based on this thing that's happening. It's just probably circumstantial, or how many times, and this is what I really encourage people to do, is like someone said something and then you inferred what they meant by that, and that it was personal.
Yep.
And you can't shake the story. And so you're starting to have this mental judgment going on. And the more you think about it, sometimes it can get kind of out of control. And the best thing to do is just to go to that person and say, hey, here's the story I can't shake. When you did this, I felt like it was personal. And how many times, I can't tell you how many times they say, oh my gosh, no, that's not what I meant. That's not what I was thinking. And I'm like, okay, well, I got a better story now. So you can do it both ways. To practice non-judgmental or not judging people, you can do it both ways. You can either make up a story for why that circumstance is happening that doubles down and approves their character as image bearers. Or if you can't shake the story that's running in your head, you could just go to them and ask them, what is the story? Give me the real story, because here's the one I got in my head. Doesn't seem like you, but here's the one I got in my head. Is that kind of what you're saying? Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. I forget who I first heard the phrase this way, but it's, you're talking to somebody. I do this with my wife a lot. The story I'm telling myself is fill in the blank, and it's like, I'm telling myself that you are mad at me because I did something, and blah, 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 whatever I'm making up. And she's like, I am frustrated at the girls, and I'm taking it out on you because you've been at work all day and you just got home. So now I want it to be your turn, but it's not because I hate you. It's just because I need a break, and you are the person to come fill that break. Whatever it is. But sometimes it's like, no, sometimes I'm sitting there and she's like, yeah, no, that's right. That's the story, and it is true. And other times, like, it's like, no, the story I'm telling myself is completely fabricated. And yeah, part of the time I'm looking at that going, well, I'm selfish, I'm self-centered because it was all about me, right? And it's like, no, it's not all about me. It is about the relationships that I'm building. And I want the relationships that I'm building to all be productive, and in whatever sense. I want them to be beneficial for both parties, or all parties if it's a larger group. And so, I've got to make sure that if I'm uncertain about something, I'm asking the right questions to make sure that I'm informed, so that I'm not creating these stories that, like you said, may cause me to judge somebody's character, when really it's not the character, it's that circumstance that led them to this, or it's my own circumstance outside of this that is somehow influencing the relationship that I've got going on right now.
So good. I love that. I love that what you're describing, because it's the story I'm telling myself actually comes from Brene Brown. And then the technical definition is, it's something called the fundamental attribution error, which is kind of a heady thing of saying our minds make up a story about someone else's behavior, and we don't know if it's really true or not. That becomes the story we're telling ourselves. It's interesting that in the lane of do not judge, when it's really, we could say that you're someone who's super judgmental is always making up these stories that are most likely inaccurate. And what's crazy to me, and what I think is true, and you kind of alluded to this, is that when you're letting others off the hook all the time, they probably feel it, and then they're more likely to not judge you. But then when you do judge them, they're more likely to judge you back. And then I think that Jesus is also saying that you could have circumstances that are not even related to each other, where you're not judging over here, and then you're judging over here, and then someone's judging you from this side. Like, we talk about what's that Buddhist thing called karma, right? Or whatever it is. Maybe it's not Buddhist, but this is the karma of Jesus, so to speak. Like, this is how he's saying, this is how the kingdom works. This is how life works. And I think it's important for us to kind of point out, as we're talking, Brandon, is that the 100x life is freedom. It's the abundant life, and so instrumental to our freedom is that we do not judge. This is how life gets really good. We don't forgive, we don't judge, we don't condemn. We're going to do condemn tomorrow, but when we don't do those things, we lift a huge burden off of our shoulders that we don't need to carry. For you, Brandon, do you feel like that burden was lifted? How would you describe it?
Yeah, I feel like it's a work in progress, right? So I'm not, if you circle back to the gap in the gain, I'm not at 100, but I know I've moved that needle a couple of times already. And so I think it's a constant work in progress. There's going to be people that are more easy for me to want to judge, and people that are, it's like, I don't even know who this person is. I'm not going to cast any judgment on them right now. It's just a brief interaction. And so I think that for me, I'm going through and trying to make these transformations where the people that I have a continuous ongoing relationship with, I'm doing what I can to try and understand their circumstances on a more consistent basis, so that I can know, hey, if they are struggling with something, maybe I can help them in that one area, and it will in turn affect something else differently. You were talking about, hey, you might be doing something here and get it from on this side. And I completely agree. It's not necessarily a mirror, right? Like, hey, I'm talking to you, I'm judging you, and so you are judging me in return. It's all encompassing. I could be judging something over here and being judged from somebody else for either doing the same exact thing, which would be the worst, or for doing something else differently because of a different circumstance or different relationship that we've got. I think I'm constantly, part of the reason I chose this word is it's still a struggle. Yes, I'm refocusing, but I am needing to continually work on it. And so it's more top of mind for me than some of the other words of Jesus. And it allows me to say, okay, in order for me to be a good person, again, whatever that means to you, a better person, a good person, I've got to do what I can to not be judging others.
So good. And you talk about the 100x life assessment, you're at Refocusing. So just for people who are listening, when you look at that, we're looking at receiving as when you first hear the word, and then retaining it as if you really press into it. You maybe memorize it, maybe you journal about it, but you're intentional. And then it sounds like you went through some resisting process. The resisting is typically when the enemy shows up to test the word. That's when you're in the gym, the faith gym. So that's a good thing when that happens, because you can rejoice and say, hey, I'm working out, I'm building a muscle. And it sounds like you've got a muscle, but you're still thinking, okay, I'm refocusing. I didn't make, which is a good way to say, I want to make sure I have reproduction. I want to make sure that I actually am, in Jesus' terms, his analogy in the parable sower, that I have a plant that bears fruit. I want to bear the fruit of not judging. And so I'm refocused on that, and I'm making sure that that is a signature action I'm doing in my life right now. So yeah, that's good. So listeners can definitely use that assessment to know where they are. And then sounds like, when you come back and do it again, you're going to be looking at some of those assessments, see how you've grown, and hopefully there's growth. Let's talk about 100X lifestyle. So there's 3 of them for today. These are ways, and this is what I'm really committed to, is how do I practically live this word? What does it practically look like to not judge? And Brandon, you've helped us so much. Here's some phrases. You have cultivated a mindset. So this is the way you think, cultivated a mindset that sees all people as children of God who bear his image. Oh my gosh. So right off the bat, it's kind of like, if I see that this person is a child of God, if I see that this person is who he is, she is, in reality, I'm going to judge. I'll probably be less likely to judge because I see the importance of who they are. Does that make sense? Would you add anything to that?
I think that's part of my transformation has been understanding not only that I'm a child of God, but that if I believe that, then by default, I'm going to believe that everybody else that I'm interacting is also a child of God. And so if it's not one thing to say, oh, well, this person's not a Christian, so they're not a child of God. That's not true. We're all children of God. It's, do they have that relationship with him yet? And regardless of their relationship with God, I've got to have my relationship with God that says, hey, I'm treating all of your sons and daughters equally, because I love them and respect them the way that you do.
That is so powerful. It's like the Christians and pre-Christians, not non-Christians, pre-Christians. And you're 100% right. Everyone is created in the image of God. And man, that really makes it easier not to judge when you're seeing people who are pre-Christians who may be very upset and raising their voice as image bearers. Okay, next one. When someone exhibits offensive behaviors, how many times are we offended in a week? When someone exhibits offensive behaviors, you naturally will think about how you could love and honor them despite their behavior. So this is back to what we were talking about, Brandon, about are you focused on the character, or are you focused on the circumstances, which would be the behavior? Does that feel like that's a good grounding in how we wouldn't judge?
That one I have starred, underlined, double highlighted. Like that is my refocusing, right? Is, trying to say, okay, I'm not necessarily pleased with the circumstance right now, but how can I get beyond that and just try and love on you?
Yeah. How many times? Yeah. I just feel like we live in a target rich environment where we're going to experience people offending us. And I like to say the true freedom, or the abundant life, is living with an unoffendable heart, which, that means that forgiveness is in front of me. It's not behind me, something after I get hit and wounded I need to repair. It's actually a shield that doesn't let me be offended. I love that you started and highlighted that one. I think that one's important to me as well. You view offensive behaviors as born out of one's despair or adverse circumstances rather than character. So this is kind of a nod to the second one, but what you're doing here is so we're saying non-judgmental behavior looks like when you are offended, you're really focused on, man, where is that person really that they would do something like that? There must be something really challenging for them right now. Jesus' response was, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they're doing. So we can read into that if the people knew that they were crucifying the Messiah, they would be appalled at their own behavior and they would stop it immediately. So that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to get in our imagination and think, oh gosh, wow, man, why did you feel like you needed to do that? Is there something I, can help you with? Is there something wrong that I can, that's a much different position than coming at someone's character.
Yeah. I mean, I think circle back to what I talked about, not understanding what sort of interactions happen before in a person's day before their interaction with me. Like you have no idea what their morning looked like. I mean, maybe they went into a meeting assuming that they were going to get good news and they came back with bad news. And it just put them in a funky mood for the rest of the day because they're still pondering, they're reflecting, and they're trying to do their own thing. They could be having the best intention and just get hit with this horrible news and be like, okay, and it, until they've had a chance to process that, I mean, they could be reflecting that negative energy. And so, you just never know. And I try and give people the benefit of the doubt. I always look at a situation, say, well, I wasn't that either, hey, I lost a project. I really wanted this project. Yeah, well, God said that wasn't the right project for me at this time, and I've found the more that I think about that, I'll circle back 4, 5, 6 months down the road and be like, man, what's going on with that project? Oh man, that project is a nightmare. Whoever's involved, like, I feel pity on them. And I'm like, thank you, God. Thanks for protecting me, or I sit there and it's like, man, we wouldn't have been able to do that project and this other project that's actually a better project because they would have tried to go at the same time. And so I would have had to split my time, and we probably would have had 2 subpar projects. And now I get to focus all my energy on this one, and this one's going to be killer. And I just wasn't supposed to have this other one. And so thinking about that, like, I keep constantly trying to find the benefit of why things didn't happen or why things did happen in a certain way. And I believe God makes everything happen on his timing. And I just have to acknowledge that and be okay with that. And if it's not my timing, if there's a misalignment there, okay, you keep using the words, what's my upgrade? I've started to say that in my head, like, okay, there's an upgrade coming because I'm hitting this, negative or this circumstance that I think is not great. It's like, okay, well, I'm looking forward to the upgrade.
So good. I love that. Yeah. Kind of like, it almost feels like, the true upgrade, when we're on our computer, like sometimes it's such a pain in the butt to stop and actually do the upgrade itself. And then when we get it and we see the magic of, hopefully it's an incredible improvement, we're like, wow. So you're pointing out that that's kind of how God's working. And, he works all things together for our good. So if they're not good yet, he's not done. And yeah, there's going to be an upgrade. That's such a better lens of looking at people and treating them and not being offended by them or take it personally, but let them off the hook or question, what is it about their adverse experience that's causing this negative behavior? So those are keys to not judging. Well, Brandon, thank you so much. Really appreciate this time with you. I think it'll be very helpful for people who are in the challenge right now. Any final words about that you would give to someone who's on day 15 of the challenge?
I think you got to just stick with it first. If you have started from day 1 or 2 or 3 and you're going through it, stick with it, because I think it's really important. And I think if you're seeing this for the first time and you're like, oh, I can't do this because it's day 15, false, like, start here. You can either make up some time, and circle back to some of the previous things, or you say, okay, I'm going to start 65 days from now, and you're going to go through the middle or end of March instead of the end of February. Like, I would just say, I encourage everybody to at least take a look at this and try and do what they can. And don't judge yourself if you can't
look at that.
If you're not doing everything that you wanted to do, or hey, I'm not getting through all these journal prompts. I went and had some sugar and did these other things. Okay, give yourself some grace and understand that you can always do better next time, next day.
I love that. Yeah, don't beat yourself up. You're actually, the process of the 62-day challenge is, in fact, a gymnasium experience. It would be really silly for a weightlifter on certain days to come in and say, I can't lift that, so my whole life is over, or I'll never be a bodybuilder. No, the certain days are harder than others. And as we're in the gym, we're building a muscle to be able to be more capable. So we can't be discouraged by tiredness or, exhaustion in the trial or the gym. We need to be inspired by the fact that it is in fact challenging, and just stay in there. I love that you said, don't judge yourself, because the enemy's trying to judge us, and then we're joining in on the kind of the self-condemnation party. Yeah, don't do that. Think of it as your perspective is, this is a gym experience and you're doing great because you're flexing the muscle, which means it's going to grow. Okay, well, thanks again, Brandon, and thanks to all our listeners. We will see you tomorrow for Do Not Condemn. It's going to be very similar, and I think this trilogy of forgive, do not judge, and do not condemn is really vital. We got to get this one through if we're going to experience the abundant life. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow, guys.
Thank you.
If you believe in the 100X Life movement, please follow and invite a friend by sharing this podcast. The 100X Life movement can also be found on Instagram and Facebook, and also at 100xlife.com. The 100X Life podcast was produced by Jenna D of Jenna D Services, with music by Ryan Ellis.
Lost, but you found me here, and your fire burns inside. It will not disappear, because the